Hello, I'm Carla Hayden, Librarian of Congress, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Veterans History Project panel discussion on motherhood and the military. 20 years ago, Congress created the Veterans History Project to strengthen our shared understanding of American history by collecting, preserving, and making accessible the individual stories of U.S. military veterans. Through the efforts of volunteers across the country helping to preserve the remembrances of veterans and Gold Star family members in their lives, the Veterans History Project has archived more than 111,000 personal narratives from America's servicemen and women. With Mother's Day around the corner, we are fortunate to be joined today by four veterans who will share their personal histories as mothers and service members. Before we kick off the panel, we are honored to welcome U.S. Senators Tammy Duckworth from Illinois and Joni Ernst from Iowa, of different political parties, but both moms and veterans, which underscores not only the dual roles of service to country and family, but also a shared commitment to our national well-being that transcends the partisan divide and unites us as Americans.
Hi, everyone. This is Senator Joni Ernst from the great state of Iowa. As a mother, a combat veteran, and a Veterans History Project participant, I am pleased to introduce today's Library of Congress panel discussion on motherhood and the military. In 2003, when my daughter Libby was just a little girl, I deployed to Kuwait during Operation Iraqi Freedom as company commander of the Iowa National Guard's 1168th Transportation Company, running supply convoys into southern Iraq. It wasn't easy leaving my little girl to serve our country halfway across the world, and that experience left me with a deep appreciation for the sacrifice our military families make, particularly our moms in uniform. In 2019, I recorded and donated my oral history to the library's Veterans History Project. Too often, the individual stories of service and sacrifice and the impact on families goes untold, and I believed it was important to share mine. If you are a veteran or Gold Star family member, please consider contributing your story to the Veterans History Project to our wonderful Library of Congress. It is important that these firsthand memories be preserved and made accessible for future generations to learn from and to be inspired by. Happy Mother's Day to all of my fellow mothers. May God bless our men and women in uniform and our veterans who have sacrificed so much. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the program.
Hello, I'm United States Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois. As a mother, a combat veteran, and Veterans History Project participant, I am pleased to introduce today's Library of Congress panel discussion on motherhood and the military. For many of us, service to our country is a family affair. In my family, there's been a Duckworth serving in uniform during every period of conflict in our nation's history, going to even before the Revolution during the French and Indian Wars. I'm proud to have continued that family legacy of in the United States Army Reserves and in the Illinois Army National Guard. In 2010, I recorded and donated my oral history to the library's Veterans History Project. I spoke about my deployment as a combat pilot in Iraq and the loss of my legs when the Black Hawk helicopter I was co-piloting was shot down. Essential to the telling of that story is my family, the long stretches apart from my loved ones, and how my husband left his job to stay with me during my 13-month recovery at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. I'm proud of my military service. I'm proud of my husband's military service. It was a privilege to serve my country, and I want my two daughters to know how much it means for our family. The dual roles of mother and soldier are not uncommon, but too often the story of service and sacrifice and the impact on individual families goes untold. Today, you will hear from four remarkable women veterans who share their experiences serving in those dual roles. If you are a veteran or Gold Star family member, please consider contributing your story to the Veterans History Project in our National Library. It is important that these first-hand remembrances be preserved and made accessible to future generations to learn from and be inspired by. Happy Mother's Day. I hope you enjoy the program.
My name is Elizabeth Estabrooks, and I am the acting executive director at the VA Center for Women Veterans. I joined the military in 1977 and was in the second wave of women to go through a fully integrated basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. It became clear that even 30 years after the Armed Services Integration Act had passed, the Army was still learning how to incorporate women into what had traditionally been known as this man's Army. As the only woman in my company in Germany for 6 months, and then one of only 6, they weren't quite sure what to do with me, especially during my pregnancy and then when I had a child. After all, it wasn't until 1975 that they even allowed women to remain when they became pregnant. When my 3-year enlistment ended, I left the military. And since then, I focused on improving services for women veterans to ensure that they know we see them, we hear them, and we are them. These women today, just like those who came before them, remind us that while motherhood itself can be a full-time job, some mothers choose to continue serving in the armed forces. They juggle the trials of parenting with the responsibility of maintaining operations, coping with deployment, and the uncertainty that can come with it all. So how do motherhood and the military intersect? I will let our distinguished panelists answer that question and more. First up, we have Candy Martin, a 38-year-old Army combat veteran who retired as a Chief Warrant Officer 5, but started her military career in the now discontinued Women's Army Corps. In addition to her service, both active and reserves, Candy served as an Army wife and parent to 4 children, Tom, Laura, Becky, and Sarah. She became a Gold Star mother when her son, U.S. Army First Lieutenant Thomas Martin, was killed in action in Iraq in October 2007. Candy is a proud grandparent who is an incredibly active member of various veteran and civic organizations. Next, we have Rue Mayweather, 36-year Army veteran who retired as a command sergeant major. Rue shattered quite a few glass ceilings, being selected as the first woman sergeant major and the first African-American woman in the 4th Brigade, 95th Division. She did all of this and more while raising her son, Kenneth, who later followed in her footsteps. Rue is one of the founding members of Task Force Sisterhood Against Sexual Assault and is an 8-time author who loves spending time with her son, grandchildren, and other family members. During her 17 years of service in the Navy, Commander Rupa Daner participated in medical missions around the world, including Afghanistan, where her team was awarded the Presidential Joint Unit Commendation for their work during Operation Marja. Her duties culminated at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, Bethesda, where she served as the Chief of Pediatric Anesthesiology. Her medical career continued as the Chief Surgical Officer at Pediatric Specialists of Virginia. Additionally, Dr. Daner is an accomplished marksman, musician, mom to Phoebe and Aurora, fiance, and holds multiple state records as a powerlifter. Mary Deaver was an Air Force media broadcast journalist who served as an embedded media, video, and photojournalist in Japan, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Following her deployments, Mary served her final 3 years in service as an instructor at Fort Meade, Maryland. After 10 years of service, Mary took a role as the Assistant National Communications Director for the 1.2 million member DAV, Disabled American Veterans, where she helps to fulfill the promises to the men and women who served while spending time with her family, including her son, 6-year-old Max. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm so honored to be here with such empowered women veterans. Each of you has had such different paths to the military and motherhood. Military mothers come in all different shapes and sizes. They are mothers while wearing their uniform. They may also be spouses running a household, and they may also watch with pride as their children raise their right hand in service to this nation, or in the case of Candy Martin, did all 3. Candy, you were a WAC when you met your husband, Ed. Can you walk us through what it was like to run the household by yourself while serving in the reserves, and then to switch roles with your husband when your kids were teenagers?
Thank you for that question, Liz. But before I answer, I want to thank the Library of Congress, and more particularly the Veterans History Project, for bringing our stories forward and helping to educate everybody that's out there listening today. It was kind of challenging when we had our first child, and then the second one, and then the third one, and then the fourth one. And those 4 little darlings were born in 5.5 years. So we did have a very busy household. And I was an Army Reserve soldier at the time. Ed being an active duty soldier, it was really a challenge in finding that balance. And with him being gone quite a bit, TDYs, things like that, and just the duty that came along with it. It was a time when I learned that as we would PCS around, that I had to find my own support system, whatever that support system was, whether it was the neighbors, whether it was the family readiness group, whether it was our church, and things like that. There was one in particular that comes to mind when I think about that support system. Her name is Sharon, and her husband was stationed with my husband. And because of that, the two of us got together quite a bit. Between the two of us, we had 7 children under the age of 10. And I was pregnant with our 4th one. And it was just an amazing trip that we would do. And we would walk into the Pizza Hut regularly. Tuesday nights was our outing with the kids, and people would just panic when we would walk in with these 7 children. And I was way pregnant with that 4th one on the way. But it was fun. You had to make the best of it. And that's just the way that it was. It was humbling when Ed and I did the role reversal switch. He had retired and I was asked to come on active duty, so I did. And we did an absolute role reversal. The kids were 9, 11, 12, and 14 at the time. Sometimes I think I got the better end of the deal because we had teenagers and he was the one home with them. It was challenging at first in that he would do all the laundry. And I remember thinking after 6 months, the towels were folded. They weren't folded how I would have folded them, but they were folded, and that's all that really mattered. So you had to just make sure that you looked at what made a difference. What was the priorities? Were the kids happy? Were they healthy? Were they adjusted, and were they doing okay with that? It was a balance that we had to find as a couple, and we had to find as a family. And a lot of time management that went into it. It was really a challenge sometimes particularly when the kids were having to be for different events throughout the daytime when mom would be on duty, and here would be that token dad that would be with the mom roles with the neighbor ladies and things. But it was challenging, rewarding, but we're so glad that we as an Army family were able to accomplish what we did. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing those stories and that experience with us. Mary, Candy spoke about limited resources around her and creating her own network of support. You served at a different time and in a different branch. What was your experience like with the Air Force?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is thank you to all the women that served before I did and broke down a lot of these barriers that I didn't have to face. Whenever I came in and told my first sergeant that I was expecting, my husband and I have been trying for a long time. There was no repercussion. Everyone was excited. And I know from talking to other people that it wasn't always like that. So I want to thank all the women that have come before me and really knocked down those walls so that people like me and the ones that are still serving don't have as much pushback as I know was in the past. So thank you for that. For me, I was on instructor duty. So I was very much supported, like I said, by my command. Some of the issues I did run into, though, was I was in a joint environment. I was Air Force working for the Army, so there were policy things that I needed to make sure I understood. And as I mentioned before, some of the women that had gone through it before were really there for me for that support that Candy mentioned. And the best piece of advice I got was to know the regs, to know what was my right and what was not. I knew that every 3 hours I was authorized 15 minutes to go pump, after I came off of maternity leave. I was, at the time, we were allotted 6 weeks for maternity leave, and I saved up my personal leave so that I could take a total of 10. Well, my supervisor didn't like that and wanted to deny it. And I found in there that was authorized. And so he couldn't deny it. So that was, I think, the best piece of advice I got from other women that had come before. Some of the other struggles, daycare was really an issue for me. We're in the DMV, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. The child development centers are packed. The wait list is long. More advice I'd been given is to get on the wait list as soon as I could. Well, I got on the wait list coming off maternity leave, and I was still at like number 90 on the spot to get into any of the facilities. So I was running around with my newborn baby trying to find childcare in time for me to be able to go back to work. So, I mean, that was an issue. And that led to another issue as far as because I wasn't on base and I wasn't with the Child Development Center, hours were different. And so I remember one time I was written up because I wasn't able to make one of our wonderful fun runs early in the morning because I didn't have childcare. And they continued to push back that the CDC opened at 600, and I didn't have that until 6:45. And so, I mean, issues like that where they didn't really want to bend, but they are better, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I did run into some things, but I know, for instance, I think it was 2018, they've extended maternity leave. I know that they are working with like the childcare options. You can get a stipend if you have to go off base, things like that we're moving forward, but definitely still some things that need to be done.
Thank you, Mary. And thanks for sharing that advice for the women who come after you.
Absolutely. I was shocked when I was, 2 weeks from coming back from maternity leave and I didn't have childcare. And yeah, it got tough. I lost a lot of money on deposits trying to just secure myself a spot. So.
Well done. Thank you. Rupa, we listened to your VHP oral history interview and heard you mention that you were working to pass your boards when you were pregnant. You mentioned how not only did you have that challenge, but with your second pregnancy, it was an uphill battle with some of your colleagues who didn't want to cut you any slack. Some even suggested that perhaps you had gotten pregnant just to avoid deployment. What was that like?
Thanks for asking about this, and thank you to the Library of Congress and the Veterans History Project for giving us all a chance to tell our stories in all of these really important ways. I was thinking about this whole panel and this questions, and I thought sometimes it's going to sound like I'm doing a lot of complaining about what it was like to be a mom in the military. And the reality is there's good and bad with everything, and it's good to be able to focus on some of the challenges that the military's had, so that just like for Mary, things get better as things move along in the future. So my experience with my children it was in the early part of the century, I guess 2010. And yeah, I mean, people didn't really suggest that I got pregnant to avoid deployment. They were super clear. They said, you got pregnant to avoid deployment. I mean, those words in that order out loud. So it wasn't like it wasn't subtle. And I'm not that subtle a person either. I think, when you're in the military, you sort of learn to speak up for yourself. So what that was like, it turned out into being a pretty public, very unprofessional fight is what it ended up looking like. So, I went to the military medical school, so I had a lot of years that I owed the military. So folks who were enlisted, maybe you signed a 1 year or 3 year or even a 4 or 5 year commitment. Coming out of the military medical school, you have a 7-year commitment. And that's after you finish doing residency training, which can be anywhere between 3 to 7 years long. And mine was about 5 years. So it's 12 years in the military after I got out of medical school. And I used to think to myself, what would I have to do to avoid deployment in this manner? I'd have to have more kids than anyone on this call. So that's not really the way to do it if you're trying to avoid deployment. So it as a suggestion, it's silly on its face of it, but it doesn't really matter. It's incredibly insulting. It's degrading. It immediately invalidates who you are and what you've given to our country and the military, whether it's by being a great student or being a great doctor, or whatever it is you give to the services. So yeah, I mean, I got very upset. I tried to fight it head on. I learned a lot of lessons about how to approach any type of prejudice or bigotry. It doesn't really work that well to fight it head on. You kind of have to be a role model and have some staying power and stick with it and show people over time who you are. without necessarily screaming it in their faces like I think I tried to do early on. But it was quite a lesson that I learned, both obviously and then less obviously over time.
Thank you for sharing that, Rupa. I think that a lot of people can benefit from hearing your honesty. And I suspect that there are a lot of women who've had those accusations slung their way. So thank you for sharing that.
Welcome.
So deployments and permanent change stations or PCS are tough on any family, especially when there are young kids at home. Rue, you joined the military when your son, Kenneth, was 4 years old. It wasn't long after training that you PCS'd or received a permanent change station to Korea. How did you prepare for that? What was it like during, and how did you reconnect after being gone for almost a year?
I'm not really sure there's a way to prepare. You know, you think you know, but then when that day comes, it's like, wow. So that was my wow, you know, and then to be actually gone for a year, you know, the days in between. So I think what most mothers would do. Fortunately, there was a store in Youngstown called Victory Town, I think. It was like one of the more modern department stores. They had toys and kind of like not really like a dealer's because they had toys too. But that store became my friend and my son's friend because every chance I got, I was there buying him things. And, you know, we talked a lot. And I engaged with him as much as I could, you know, to stay in his life. And I think the heartbreak, though, was when I came home. And because he had been with his dad, they had bonded. I mean, they were closer than air to begin with. But what I noticed, like, they came to pick me up at the airport, and naturally he was happy to see me. But then I noticed, like, he was just distant, and I thought, and that just broke my heart. But then, you know, being a quick thinker and ready person on my feet, I have to analyze that and just size up what that was, you know. Okay, you haven't been here, he's been with his dad, you know, and it isn't that he doesn't love you, you just haven't been here. And so I basically just had to just step back and allow the love to regrow with us. And so we had this thing before where we would go on our little dates, and we would always go either to Sonic's or McDonald's, and it would just be his time, and he could talk about whatever he wanted, and we do whatever he wanted. And we still do that now whenever he's in town. You know, we go to dinner or movie, and we eventually rebonded. But, you know, and it took about a year for us to reconnect.
Wow, thank you. That was so touching and so beautiful. And I think so important for so many women who are experiencing that to hear. So thank you for sharing that. The deployment of military women with children is a growing phenomenon. According to an article in Military Medicine, women represent anywhere from 15% to 20% of all active and reserve military members, and more than 40% of military women have children. Rupa, I understand that Phoebe and Aurora were in preschool when you found out you were deploying to Afghanistan. Same question to you. How did you prepare for that, and what was it like during? And how did you reconnect after we?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's nice to be able to answer that along with Rue being here to kind of hear her story as well. I think the first thing I did was have a little miniature panic attack where I felt like I couldn't breathe and wasn't sure what to do next. And like Rue, I had to take a minute and say to myself, hold on, you can think through this. Something's going to change. You'll be able to prepare for this somehow or another. And the kids were 2 and 4, and they did stay with their dad, who wasn't used to taking care of them quite the same way I was. So that was going to be a big change for him as well. So I did everything I could think of, actually. You know, now we're looking at a different time frame. The internet is just kind of growing at this point. So I was able to go on at that time, very, very high cutting edge website, Snapfish, and print out a blanket that had photos of me and the daughter who I gave the blanket to. So I made 2 blankets, one for each kid, and I printed out photos and called it a mommy blanket. That was like very forward thinking back then because no one else could do that. They were like, what website did you go to? So I did that. And I had an amazing friend at the daycare that I had my kids at. Her thing was creating life stories. That was her work. And she volunteered her time to me and my family. And we made stories, little short stories, kind of like Dora the Explorer lover stories, where I'd say good morning to the kids. Or I'd say good night. And I wished them a happy holiday for all the holidays I knew I'd be gone for. And they called it the Mommy Show, and they would watch it while I was gone. And then, at ages 2 and 4 years old, they don't really understand time very well. I'm a pediatric anesthesiologist. I spend a lot of time with kids and have a pretty good idea where they are developmentally. You could be gone for a day or a week, and it's hard for them to really quite understand the length of time. So I made them this super big poster board that had the days of the week on the months that I'd be gone, with a couple extra months at the end, because with deployment, you never know when you're coming home. So every day they would cross off a day and they'd get a kiss, a Hershey kiss, which was a kiss for mommy. So just these things, I had gifts pre-wrapped for them so that at various intervals, their dad would give them a gift from mommy, because they're like, oh, look, this gift just came from mommy in Afghanistan. I didn't even know where in Afghanistan I was going to be. So things like that, it seems like I was so prepared. But that's like the typical, type A kind of woman thing to do, is to pretend like you're prepared and then realize you're totally not prepared. So you go and you're in country and you're just, you're taking care of toddlers. You guys all know even better than me how much effort that is. And all of a sudden your kids are gone and you have nothing to do. Like, you're busy, right? Because you're deployed, but you know how kids are, they're just constant. They're constant diapers, constant food, and constant feed. Well, now they're gone and there's nothing to do. And then you realize, like, part of you kind of likes it because you're exhausted and it's nice to have a break and you can sleep all night long and nobody's crawling into your bed and saying your name while you're in the bathroom. But then you feel guilty because now you feel that you have a break, and then you cry and then no one else is crying because you're the only girl there. So there's a lot to kind of manage, and over time you sort of have to let yourself not feel guilty and not be ashamed of how you feel, and realize that this is all normal. And look at the guys, like, I don't know if any of them are feeling what I'm feeling. I'm not sure. And then I came home. And my daughters also recognized me at the airport. One of them threw up on me. That was super awesome because they were a little motion sick, I think, from the car ride. And I think, just like Rue, it takes people time to get back in the swing of things. And I looked different after I came home from deployment. I mean, I'll be honest, the Navy's weight standards aren't really all that tough. And prior to leaving, I was on the high end of it. And when I got home, I had lost a lot of weight, and it was, good. I was in great shape, but my kids were a little bit like, you look like the lady in the Mommy Show, but 30 pounds lighter. So it was a little hard for them to sort of understand I was the same person. And it takes a really long time, not only to integrate from being back from deployment or from another country, but also, to kind of get back into that role of mom. And you don't want to push yourself on someone too fast. You just have to kind of let them come to you. And they do eventually.
Well, again, great. Thank you for that honesty. I think that between you and Rue, mothers watching this will just walk away with some really good, mothers who are getting ready to deploy or may deploy will have some great lessons learned. So thank you both for what you've just said, because I think it matters so much. So since the draft ended in 1973, being born into a military family has become a much more important marker of a future in the armed forces. Candy, I have a 3-part question for you. How did you feel knowing Tom wanted to join the Army? What was it like being in the military at the same time as your son, and knowing that he deployed to some of the same precarious locations you had just returned from?
Wow, that's a triple question, isn't it? It's Tom came from a long line of service, and we can go back through every generation, back to the Revolutionary War, that we trace our family's history of service. And I was always thankful that he really wanted to serve. When he was a little boy, he was about 6 years old, and someone gave him a poster of West Point, and it hung on his bedroom wall. It was thumbtacked up there, and I thought, gosh, he's got all these aspirations, but will it ever come? And eventually it did. He spent 3 years as an enlisted soldier before he went to the academy, where he graduated in 2005. So I'm glad that that part kept up as far as his fruition with wanting to be a soldier. He, when you're a teenage boy, it's not cool to hang around your mom. But if your mom happens to be wearing BDUs and combat boots, it's pretty cool sometimes. He used to like it whenever I would ever come to the high school to pick him up for certain things or come for an appointment or anything. And initially, I thought he's going to be so embarrassed walking with me, and he wasn't. He was extremely proud that I was serving in the military, and he was very, very proud when he took that first step too. When I think about his service, I was always in his corner and championed the idea that he wanted to serve. I was so proud that when he asked me if I would administer the oath of office for him to join, I was thrilled to be able to do that. And then later on, when he received his commission, I was his first salute. My being a warrant officer and him being a brand new second lieutenant, that meant that he outranked me real quick. And so that was really a highlight too of our time together. It was really, really, really special. When I think about his service, and people would ask me, you know, what are you afraid for him? And I said, no, that's what the military does, is they teach us to be leaders. They taught him to be a leader. He was born to be a leader. And I don't know if that was because of the way he was born, the first of our 4 children, but he just had that natural innate leadership ability behind him. And so I think that he really did well. About 4 years ago, I had a friend call me one day, and her son was preparing for military service. He knew that he either wanted to go to one of the service academies, or he wanted to become a cadet with one of our military ROTC programs. And I will tell you that right now he's getting ready to graduate next month, and he will be commissioned as a second lieutenant. He's with the Corps of Cadets at Texas A&M University. And when she called me, she said, I want you to talk me out of this, and I want you to talk him into this, talk him down and not have him go into the military service. And I listened to her for quite a while. And I said to her calmly, I said, I just have a question for you. And she said, absolutely. What's the question? I said, if not yours, then whose? Whose child would you be willing to say, raise your right hand and go ahead and support and defend the Constitution that all of us enjoy every single day, with the benefits and the rights and the privileges that we have for living in this country? And to this day, that mom is so thankful that I actually asked her that very strange question, but she's bursting with pride because of her son is a leader. And I'm confident to know that my son died doing what he believed in. And it warms my heart to know that Tom truly was a leader. There's a quick story I want to tell you and share with you. I was deployed. I was in Iraq, and Tom was finishing up his OBC course. He was at Fort Knox, Kentucky, in the armor school. And he called me in Iraq and said, Mom, I got the Draper Award today. And I said, oh, honey, I'm so incredibly proud of you. That is just fabulous. I'm really, really proud of you. And I'm just can imagine he was bursting with pride. And I hung up afterwards, that short phone call, thinking, what's the Draper Award? I had no idea what the Draper Award was. And I soon forgot about it. And it was a couple of years later when Tom was killed in action, and all of his personal belongings came home. And in the box that came with all of his belongings was the coveted Draper Award. And I looked at it and I thought, oh my gosh. Well, then I Googled it and realized what it was. It was the Leadership Award for the Armor Officer Basic Course. And I thought, here is my son who just received this top honor. And boy, I felt like the worst mother in the world. I had no idea what it was, but I do remember thinking back to my cheerleader moment where, yes, you did really, really great. And mommy is so proud of you. But here he was, a soldier, something that I had had for all of my life. And I was so glad that I thought back to that time. I wish he were here now so that I could tell him how proud I really was, but I think he always knew it, and that's a really good thing. So I was proud being a soldier, proud being a mom, and proud being a mom of a soldier. Thank you.
Wow, thank you for sharing that beautiful and touching story. And I'm pretty sure he knows how proud you were of him. So many powerful and empowered mothers here. I just am so touched. Thank you all. It's just wonderful to hear your stories. Rue, your son Kenneth also deployed just after you to a close by location in Iraq. Do you have some peace of mind knowing he was close by? And can you share about a very special Mother's Day you were able to cook up?
Yes. Denise and I always spend Mother's Day together, or we try to. So when we deployed to Iraq, he was in Taji, I was in Baghdad. And so unknown to me, he was planning to come to Baghdad while I was planning to go to Taji. So I had picked up the phone and I was coordinating with his CSM to travel to Taji. And so my plan actually was executed. So I actually arrived in Taji. His CSM picked me up. And so I think his S3 or someone told him that they needed to talk to him, like very sternly. So he was like, I couldn't imagine what they wanted to talk to me about. So anyway, he comes in the room and I'm standing there and he's just like, ah. And so he told his commander, she's always up to something. And so that was great. And so after that, we were able to spend Father's Day together because I was there still in June. And also later on, he got promoted while I was there. So I got to pin him. And if we could travel back when he got commissioned, I was able to pin him, give him his first salute also. So yeah, so that was wonderful. That was wonderful. And while I was there visiting him for Mother's Day, he is an Apache fighter pilot. Yeah. So he just took me on a little tour and showed me the Apache and how it works and all the things that was of interest to him. So that was really good.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. It just goes to show no matter how old they get or how much rank they have, they can't outsmart their mothers. Mary, you transitioned out of the military as a young mom with a 1-year-old. I did the same thing with the Army in 1980. My daughter and I arrived at midnight at Fort Dix and had no place to stay and no plans for the next day. With no plan for my daughter, it was even suggested that I head to billets and be show up at 0500 for formation, just like everyone else. What was your out process like? Were there any transitional programs to help you find your footing as a new civilian mom? And was it hard for you to reconcile these societal roles as caregivers, mothers, and wives with the warrior you are?
Thank you for that question. My experience was a little bit different because I stayed in the area, so I didn't have to move. But I will say I had a colonel, and my son has autism. And so I had decided I was right at that 10-year mark to get out rather than continue on and retire. And I'd received a bit of pushback and things like that. But when I went to the colonel and I explained the situation and I told him about DAV because I had some friends that I had served with who had gone on to work for DAV. And I actually had a job offer letter from that organization to continue after my terminal leave. And so that colonel became very supportive, knowing that I had a plan and things like that. And so the rest of my out processing went fairly well. I think the biggest challenge I faced was that there's not a lot of preparation for all veterans really, but separating when you have that young family and things like that, as far as the mental toll that it takes, the transition, the just your life, whether you stay in the same area or not, is completely different. And there was a lot of issues with that, issues getting care, issues just kind of dealing with some of the things that you push down when you're active duty. And that you just, the thing that my chief always loved to tell me, shut up and color, you kind of shut up and color for so many years, and then you get out and you have to deal with it. And there wasn't anything there to kind of help that along. So I think that was a challenge. And I don't think that's specific to, motherhood or things like that. I think that's any veteran leaving service after however many years they've been in, whether they did a whole career or one tour. So I think that that's something that we need to continue to work on. I will say, again, with the organization that I do work for, but they were very helpful as far as helping me to get my benefits, helping me to understand what I needed, what I had earned, and helping me understand that as a woman veteran, I was entitled to the same benefits as my male counterparts. And over time, I've learned that a lot of women don't actually take advantage of those programs. They don't identify as veterans. They don't wear it as proudly. Oftentimes they're assumed to not be the veteran if a family walks in. My son's father, he was in the Army, so we were both veterans. But it was rarely brought up that I was the veteran, and so having, we talk about support system, having that support system around that had gone through it before was helpful. But I think that there's still a lot to be done when it comes to changing the dialogue around mothers in the military and women in the military. And once we cross that bridge and get out into the civilian life, what support is there to help us make that transition? And how can we help each other? Because I had a friend who got out, and I remember her telling me that she'd started this new job and she'd gone in and she'd been happy and ready to work, and she met another woman there, and she said, okay, are we best friends now? Because women in the military, whenever we go on assignment, we immediately click with each other, and then we're there for each other, just like that, no questions asked. And she said the lady kind of looked at her crazy and said, I just met you. And she's thinking, well, if this were a deployment, we'd suddenly be hip to hip. So I think that we need more support there, especially as people get out and go to places that maybe don't have a strong military or veteran presence, because it is psychologically challenging to make that transition. Without going too far into details, my life has obviously completely changed, but the relationship that I had, my marriage, I'm now divorced. There was just a lot of things there that I wasn't prepared or wasn't expecting to have to deal with as a young mom, not starting over, but starting this new chapter without that kind of knowledge or preparation, I guess is a good way to say it.
Thank you. I think you've touched on some really important topics, transition being one of them, and that's a difficult time, and the realities that women veterans face, not being identified, et cetera. So, and thank you for talking about earned benefits that women veterans earned. I appreciate hearing that as well, Mary. So thank you for everything that you just said. Again, really important stuff for all the women veterans who are watching this recording. Now I have a few questions for all of you. And so please, any of you can feel free to answer. The first question, what challenges or advantages, Mary gave us a great segue. What challenges or advantages have we yet to discuss? Candy?
I think the challenges that we haven't really discussed, Mary hit on it a little bit with where do we go from here? How do we get the VA to recognize that there really are women veterans out there? How do we get not only the big VA, but our local VAs? And I've had some challenges with that specifically. And not only that, but the general public. I just, when we would PCS around, we would meet a couple at church and they would automatically look at my husband and say, and tell me, what do you do? And Ed would very proudly say, I'm a kept man. I follow her around. And so it was really kind of challenging for us to say that, yes, women can be that leader of the family bread money that comes in, and that's okay. And that's really a challenge. And I don't know that we will ever get there, but I think with programs such as this that get the word out that there are women with unique challenges, women who serve our country with very unique challenges, and it doesn't stop when you take the uniform off. So I think we need to continue with these type of education. Great question.
Thank you. Mary?
I would just piggyback off of what Candy said. We've made significant progress over the last few years. The passage of the Deborah Sampson Act that went through the last Congress helps incorporate a lot of these things that we've talked about today, and including education and resources for women veterans. But one of the things whenever we talk about motherhood and things like that is a recent study came out that only about 11% of VA facilities have maternity care. And so if we want women to take advantage of those benefits and those earned health care, we need to kind of bridge that. And if they have to go out in the community, we need more of a continuity of care, a communication, electronic health records, things like that, to make sure that the whole veteran is being cared for. And that includes maternity care or fertility care, women's specific needs that sometimes aren't addressed at these local facilities, and then if they're sent out to the community, there's no communication. So I think that that's something that, as Candy said, as long as we continue this conversation and keep it moving forward and educating other people around that to know what needs to be done, I think that we'll see significant increases. But with women who serve in the military have a higher risk of at-risk pregnancies. A lot of times with PTSD or MST or substance abuse issues. And so if they do need to go into the community for that maternity care, there needs to be that education element to help make sure that everything is covered for that veteran.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Ru and Rupa, do you have anything to add?
You know what? I don't think I have a whole lot to add. I definitely just was nodding along when I heard the stories from Candy and Mary. I think I was telling someone on the phone the other day, might have been Carrie, that when my now fiance and I go to the Home Depot has a 10% military discount, which I love. And then got to show them your D214 or your veteran card or something like that to get it. But my fiance is 6'4" and was in the Army for 10 years and maintains a pretty short haircut and is a very fit man. And when we walk in to get that military discount, they just they're falling all over themselves to give it to him. He definitely doesn't have to show any ID or any kind of card. When I ask for it, I feel like a criminal. So I have to show, the proof of service. Of my ex-husband, my fiance, and me, all three of us have served in the military. My ex-husband was a United States Naval Academy graduate, and of the three of us, I'm the only one who deployed to a war zone. The rest of them sat at home. and yet I feel like I'm the one who has to prove it all the time. So definitely we have a long way to go.
Thank you. Ru?
Yes, I would mention sexual assault in the military because it's still alive and well and growing like an octopus. Okay. And if I could be allowed to mention, that's what my latest book is about, In Her Boots. And the other thing is, I would say senior leadership receiving veterans benefits, I guess if I can say it that way. Um, and I'll use myself as an example. It isn't that maybe that I didn't have time to go to go and take care of myself, but it's just, you can't do it as regularly as your subordinates can, because you're busy managing and taking care of other people and other things. And so it does become an issue later on, so my goal or my wish is that the people at VA would recognize that. But I know if it isn't documented, they don't know it. And, if it isn't in black and white, it didn't happen. But I just wish there was some common sense there,
Thank you so much. So next question, do you think that serving in the military made you a better mother? And did being a mother make you a better service member? Rupa?
I think being a mother makes me a better service member because I've noticed that in every leadership job I've ever had, including the one I currently have, it's like having all these extra children. And so you learn how to manage kids of very many different ages, even some in their 50s when it comes to this stuff. So in the same lessons I learned with my kids when they were little, as teenagers, I kind of carry it over into my work.
Thank you. All the hands went up at one time.
Oh, okay.
Ruth still has hers up, so I'll let her go.
I would say being a mom made me a better leader, because at the end of the day, like with my son, everybody wants attention, everybody wants to be heard, everybody's view is important, and which it is, So what I always tell my folks, like when you come to me the first time and you don't get my attention, if it's really important, come back to me, come back to me again, because there's so many things going on top level that is important. I'm not saying that what you need isn't important, but my focus is elsewhere. So just come back to me,
Excellent, thank you. Candy?
When I think back about my role, my life, I couldn't have been a soldier without being a mom, and I couldn't have been a mom without being a soldier. So for me, they went hand in hand. But I do remember back when I'd been in about the 19 or 20 year mark, and I had soldiers that were working for me under my supervision, and they weren't even born when I first enlisted into the Women's Army Corps. And I thought, gosh, that means I'm really, really old. But they looked at me with respect. They looked at me with that mother figure with, gosh, maybe she does know what she's talking about because she's been doing this longer than we have been doing this. A funny story that happened one time, this was about 3 years ago, I was asked to be a keynote speaker at a dining out. And there was about 900 soldiers that were there. And I think this had been the first dining out that they had had in years and years and years. It was for a brigade level. And they wouldn't stop talking. During all of the key introductions, the battalion commander couldn't get them to stop, or the brigade commander couldn't get them to stop. The command sergeant major was trying to get them to hush down. And finally, I was introduced. And when I took the steps up to the dais, I thought, gosh, what am I going to do? They're not going to hear a word that I have to say because they won't quit talking. So I just stood at the microphone and looked across this whole sea of 900 young soldier faces and said, it's a mom thing. I'm going to wait until they all get quiet. And eventually that quietness just rippled through the room and you could have heard a pin drop. And then I was able to deliver my remarks to them. And afterwards, the brigade commander came up and said, I never thought about doing it like that way. You're probably right. It was a mom thing and it worked.
It's so true. Mary?
I became a mother at the end of my Air Force career. So I would actually say that I think my military service has made me a better mother in some ways. I remember very early on a mentor talking to me about triaging your priorities. You know, what needs to happen now, and how can you overcome this now? What can you do within your control to, you know, take care of business, basically. And so I remember whenever my son was diagnosed with autism, rather than, you know, and any reaction is okay, but I remember I just kind of took some of those skills that I'd learned through being a leader in the military and saying, okay, this is the information I need. This is how I need to get it. This is who I need to talk to. This is how I need to document it. You know, you learn all of those things to get business done first and then kind of deal with it later. And I think in a lot of ways, especially having a 6-year-old little boy during a pandemic, it has made me a better mother as far as, you know, keeping things going during Zoom kindergarten and healthcare visits and things like that organization and that, I don't want to say the word discipline, but that love and that consistency that I had from some of my better leaders in the military, I've been able to kind of use that because there are those leaders that, you know, they're strict and they're to their point, but you know that they care about you and your well-being. And that's how I feel that has impacted me as a mother. I feel like I'm able to kind of bring that. My son knows that he is my son in stars, but he also knows don't mess with me. You know, if I've said this or I've said that, and I've had to pull that out, you know, at certain points during his care for advocacy reasons and for, you know, the school board and things like that. And so I think that experience in the military and learning how to advocate for those around me has really helped me in my journey through motherhood so far, my early 6 years in. So I am grateful for that in a lot of ways, but I think the biggest way is knowing how to advocate for my son and for his needs, just like I was shown how to by leaders that I had, and in turn, hope I was able to do whenever I was in that position.
Excellent. Again, great advice for those watching. Thank you. So the last question, any advice or knowledge you would like to impart? There's been some great stuff today too, but I know that we're going to wrap it up with some good stuff. Any advice or knowledge you would like to impart for anyone watching this panel, whether it is a mom considering joining, someone on active duty, a parent ready for her son or daughter to deploy, or a civilian simply watching? Who wants to go first? Mary?
I'm always ready, I guess. I would go back to what I said at the very beginning is know the regulations, know the policies, know your rights, and find your support system. And that might come from somewhere unexpected, but get yourself out of your comfort zone and learn what you should be advocating for yourself for, because some well-intentioned people might steer you in the wrong direction, and then you know you find yourself in a position where you're not where you need to be as a mother or as a caregiver, as you know, a family member. So know what those rules are and what those policies are and how they apply to you and how you can enforce them and follow them and take care of yourself and your family, and get that support system that you need, because none of us can do it alone. None of us can. No matter how strong or independent we are, we need that support system, and it's there. You just have to find it.
Excellent. Thank you, Mary. Rue?
Yes, I would agree on the support system. That was invaluable to me for 36 years. But I would also add to know that you are that you have value, that you are invaluable, and for the females not to lose your femininity.
Thank you. Thank you. Rupa and Candy, would you like to add anything? Yes, Candy.
I'm trying to unmute. It's that's a great question to finish up with, and I loved what Rue said, to not lose your femininity. That's so key. Even though we are women that are serving today, I think back to my own basic training when I was in the Women's Army Corps, and we had poison etiquette classes. That was what they thought was important at the time, and we had Max Factor makeup classes. It was kind of a crazy time for the military, but that's what they taught us. They don't teach that anymore, but it is important to not to lose being that feminine side. I also think it's important to let women know that it's okay to be emotional. Not all the time, not fanatically emotional, but it's okay to show emotion. And that just shows that you are a woman, you are a service member, and you can still remain professional while you're also showing that emotion or non-emotion. It's a good thing. Make sure that when you do make mistakes, and we all do, that you're okay to admit that and learn from your mistakes. And we all do, and don't be afraid of making those mistakes. Just like I think Mary's the one that said, get out there and get after it, and just be what you can be. Be proud. There are not many women in the military today. I think the number is like 3 million women who have ever raised their hand to serve, to support and defend our Constitution. And I will tell you that I'm extremely proud to say that I'm a soldier for life. And I wish that everybody had that same feeling that I do. Remain proud. Thank you.
Thanks, Candy. Rupa?
I would say, just like what Mary said, find your support system, but find a role model, find somebody that you can look to, whether it's a man or a woman who you can look to be like, if that's what you want to do. And if you can't find a role model, be a role model. Just do whatever it is that you think your dream is. Because the one thing I've learned over this shorter time on earth I've had is that as a cutting edge, so I thought I was 10 years ago, you'd be surprised how in just a few years, everyone agrees with you. How all of a sudden, everything that you thought the Max Factor makeup class was stupid, it is, and they quit teaching it, right? And so, eventually time will catch up with you. So don't let what's going on around you slow you down. Be your own role model.
I love that. I love that. And I think that all of this has been really good advice. Thank you. And I would reemphasize the know your rights. I think that is so important. Know your rights. I talked to women, they tried to force me to discharge, but I knew my rights. I knew they couldn't throw me out because I was pregnant. And I talked to a lot of women today who are still, there's still attempts to coerce them or force them to discharge because they're pregnant. And I always say to women, know your rights. That's so important. Wrapping up, I couldn't agree more with all of the brilliant things that you've said today, that people hopefully have been taking notes. There was a 2010 DoD report that let us know that since 2001, over 2.1 million American men and women in uniform have deployed in support of the various post 9/11 Middle East conflicts. 19% of them have been women. The number of women enlisting is growing, outpacing the number of men enlisting. Approximately 58% of women veterans are parents. 11% are single parents. We must acknowledge that many of these individuals are our newest group of incoming veterans. They're the mothers, the wives, the warriors, and we need to listen and learn from their experiences, just as we listen today and learn from yours. I hope this Mother's Day, each of you watching thinks about the women veterans in your lives. Ask them to share their story with you for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project, so we can all learn from their memories and continue to build better futures for our next generation. On behalf of the VA Center for Women Veterans, our panelists, and the Veterans History Project, thanks for watching, and we wish all of you, your mothers and mother figures, a very happy Mother's Day.